My name is Simon Gottschlag, and I'm the CTO at Zenit AB. I'm a newbie Gopher, and for you who don't know what a Gopher is, that's people who write in Go. I've just learned coding like a year and a half ago, and I really like it. I'm an OAuth and OpenID Connect addict, and I don't mean that in either a bad or a good way. For some reason, I'm always getting I'm always having to work with these technologies nowadays, and I do actually like it. And I'm also a father of two, Otis and Vera. So, who of you have heard about OpenID Connect? Raise your hands. All right, most of you. Who of you are working with OpenID Connect? A few of you. That's good. So, OpenID Connect is an authentication protocol that extends OAuth 2.0, and just FYI, OAuth 2.1 is on its way out. So it's coming. Winter is coming. It adds an identity layer to OAuth 2 and is a modern SAML where you use JSON instead of XML, and you don't have to manually exchange certificates and awful stuff like that. So there are a few ways to use OpenID Connect in your services. The main ways are usually authorization code flow, implicit or hybrid, and the last one is PKCE or PKCE, proof key for code exchange. And the big thing, if we go back one step, in OAuth 2.1 is that there will only be one way to do this, and that's actually PKCE. So in the future, you will only be able to do this one way. As Philip said, I had like 2 hours to prepare for this presentation, so you won't see any nice pictures, and all pictures are stolen from the page over here. So just so you know, I haven't done these myself. Are you able to see this picture? Yeah. Yeah, all right. So I'm not going to go through all the ways you're able to use OpenID Connect or OAuth, but perhaps the most common one is the authorization code flow, where the client gets a code and is able to exchange it with the server, and it receives a token. The flow, as you see here, can be perhaps complex, but it's quite easy to get started with it. There are also, I think that the big difference between the authorization code flow and the implicit and hybrid flows are that the implicit flows actually expose the tokens to either the query parameters in the browser, so it's not classified as secure as this one. Are you able to see this as well? Yeah. All right. So when you're using authorization code, the main point is to actually that you tell the authorization server that you want a code. You identify yourself as a specific client, and you tell it what kind of what your callback is. Callback is how should the authorization server send the traffic back to you. And in this case, you're also able to specify the audience. It's usually not a requirement, and a state. And a state is used to actually verify that you get the response from the correct party, and that is combined with the correct flow. PKCE. And one last thing about the authorization code flow, which is quite annoying, is that when you actually extract the token you have to have a shared secret between the authorization server and the client. And that means that you actually have to keep this secret safe, and if you want to keep it safe, you actually have to rotate it once in a while as well. And as you all know, it's quite annoying handling secrets. And in comes PKCE. And the one big difference between authorization code flow and PKCE is that you don't have to manage the secrets. Now you're able to authenticate the users without actually having a shared secret. And in this case, instead of just using code, you're adding two additional parameters: code challenge and a code challenge method. And in this way, if your authorization server has support for it, you now don't have to actually have a secret when you extract the tokens in the later stage.
Was this already part of 2.0 or is coming in 2.1?
Most of them actually have support for this already. And 2.1 will require it.
Oh.
So you won't be able to use any other flow in the future. And just as an example, how you could create this code verifier and challenge on your side. I'm not going to go through it specifically, but the big thing is you generate the client. This could actually be the front end or the back end generates a secret temporarily, an ephemeral secret, and it encodes it, and it gives you a verifier, and this verifier you send to you send the challenge to the authorization server, and then when you extract the tokens, you use the verifier, and in that way, it's the authorization server is actually able to verify that it's able to encode the verifier into the challenge, and it's able to combine these two. The token response usually looks something like this. If you're interested, I should most likely have had this in the beginning. And let's see. So when you do either the authorization code flow or the PKCE flow, in the last step you receive a code from the authorization server. You send this code together with either your verifier or the shared secret, and you will receive your access token, your ID token, and perhaps even your refresh token. How many of you know the difference between an ID token and an access token? A few of you. All right. I'm not going to challenge you on this, but I haven't actually found any specification saying when you should use which one of them. Both of them are actually, you're able to verify them using the signatures of your authorization server. But the difference I try to tell people to use is you're using the ID token for the front end, and you don't actually use it to verify anything other. So perhaps populate a front end with a username. That's what you use the ID token for. And the access token is what you use to send to the backend. And if you have a front end that's using OpenID Connect or OAuth, there is also a refresh token. The refresh token is used to issue new tokens, ID tokens and access tokens for you. So most of the time, an access token, an ID token is perhaps valid for an hour, while your refresh token has a longer validity. And in this case, this is how you issue a new access token using your refresh tokens. So when you have your access token and you want to access an API, what do you have to do to actually validate that this token is issued from the correct authorization server. A few of the steps are when your server, your API starts up, you have to download or get and cache the public keys from the authorization server to actually be able to validate that the tokens you receive are signed by this, by the private key connected to this public key. When you receive it, you have to extract the token or the JWT. You have to validate the JWT using the public keys you've downloaded. You have to check the token expiry, verify that the token has the correct issuer, and verify that the token has the correct audience, and perhaps even validate that other claims in the token are valid. It's quite a lot to remember. Do you think a lot of people do mistakes here? Most of the time. It's quite hard. And how many of you know deeply how a PKI works? How to validate something that's signed? One of you. Two. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And you should be really careful when you do these things. You have to think about it. There was a big CV or big security issue in the, I think it was the JavaScript landscape, where the validation of the signed tokens worked as it should. If you sent a token with a wrong signer, it didn't validate it. But if you downloaded the public key and you used the public key as a shared secret and sent this token to the APIs, it was actually valid. And the same thing went for if you just removed the signer and sent it to the API, it was actually valid. So these kinds of things are mistakes that everyone, even those who worked with this a lot, have done. So if you're working with tokens, and especially if you're working with something, either an API or an API gateway or a reverse proxy that's validating these tokens, be careful. It's extremely easy to make a mistake. I've spent a few evenings writing Golang middleware for the different HTTP servers in Golang that at least tries to make it easier for the developers using Go to validate these tokens. In my case, you're able to insert the issuer, you're able to actually specify what kind of token you want to be able to receive. I talked about ID tokens versus access tokens. You're actually able to, a lot of the issuers set a header on tokens, what kind of token it is. Is it a JWT or is it an access token? And these access tokens are sometimes marked like JWT plus AT for access token. The audience, perhaps you have a token, if you're, how many here are using Azure AD, OAuth, Auth 0, Okta, or any of those providers? A few of you. That's great. So if when you're using a provider like that, you're able to create different clients that can be used. But all these clients have the same issuer, the same signer. If you're not careful, two clients could actually be used by the same API, but you don't actually want that because they are completely different. And that's when you should verify the audience of the token. The same thing goes for what's the kind of signatures are used, and perhaps even you want to verify other things in your tokens. So in this case, I've built something that's able to actually dig down into your token and validate specific things. In this case, for Azure AD, validate that the tenant ID is the one you're expecting. And how many of you have written a Go web server? Oh, that's a lot of you. That's nice. In this case, I'm using Gin. The middleware I've written actually supports most of the larger HTTP servers. But in this case, it's quite easy to use it. You add the handler, and then you use it. And when you use it, you're able to extract the claims, and you can verify the claims. And you can make sure that the claims are verified in this case. So, if you want to use this middleware, you can grab it here. It's open source, MIT, do whatever you want with it. And please do a PR if you see any issues. Well, thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Come on. Even questions.
Why do you like Go?
Why do I like Go?
Yes.
So, I've worked with, I've played with Linux since I was 11, and I've done like Bash and scripting. And when I was 19, I started at Zenit, started working at Zenit, and I learned PowerShell, and I learned like the Microsoft ecosystem. But I've never actually done any programming except in upper secondary high school or gymnasiet, and like I never did any coding. And then Philip started at Zenit and told me that it's really fun coding, and I thought perhaps I should try. So I started by trying to learn TypeScript, and the bad idea here was I learned TypeScript doing functional programming, so it was extremely hard. Because I had to keep all the functions pure. I have no idea why I actually did that, but that was my start with coding. And then Philip introduced me to Go, and it was so easy. And it was a lot of fun, and I was productive, and I was able to actually build stuff that I can use. I have worked a lot with reverse proxies and application delivery controllers through the years. So the first project I did in Go was a reverse proxy for the Kubernetes API, where I do impersonation for Azure AD. So using a lot of OpenID Connect there as well. And it was fun, and I had some free time over, and I thought perhaps I should do a middleware making it easy to use tokens issued by an OpenID provider. And I did this one. Yeah.
I just wonder.
It's fun.
Yeah, I think so.
Any other questions?
So now we were going to have a break. Yeah.
I tend to, when you want to use OIDC, I tend to use sidecars a lot. So what would you think are the advantages to putting it into your code instead? I generally use it to get it away from the developers.
Yeah, extremely good question. I want the developers to actually understand what they are doing. I don't want to remove the responsibility from them, because if we remove this responsibility from them, they won't take any responsibility for it. And I think it's extremely important that we're able to enable the developers to do what they want. At the same time, I want to make sure that they can take the responsibility when something goes wrong. So I actually don't want to make it easier for them. I want them to learn